I forgot my wallet at my daughter's place and went back. At the door I heard my son-in-law sneer. Who cares, soon her apartment will be ours. Let her rot on the street. I quietly stepped away without rattling my keys. But within a week, they realized I'd been playing a much better game than they had. Subscribe to the channel and share your stories in the comments. And now, let's get started. I pushed open my bedroom door and froze. The sound hit me first, the rasp of rollers dragging across plaster, the squeak of metal ladders shifting. Then came the smell. Sharp, chemical, suffocating. The scent of 100 sunsets being buried alive under coats of sterile white. Two men in paint-stained coveralls moved methodically across my walls, their hands steady, their faces blank. They weren't careful. They weren't reverent. They didn't see a room, they saw surface. With each swipe of paint, years disappeared. The peach walls, my peach walls, were smothered. That color had caught the light every evening when the sun sank behind the elms, washing the room in warmth. I had chosen it 21 years ago after Walt died, needing a shade that reminded me of softness when grief made every edge sharp. It wasn't just paint. It was my survival. And now it dripped down rollers into trays like it had never mattered. My floral curtains, hand-sewn with a pattern of violets I couldn't resist at a clearance table, lay crumpled on the floor, dirt and boot marks pressed into their folds. They looked less like fabric and more like bodies discarded after a war. And in the middle of the chaos stood my dresser. My dresser. I had rescued it from a curb in 1998. Wood swollen and warped from rain, drawers stuck like jaws locked shut. I had spent weeks sanding it down, sealing the grain, coaxing it back to life. Each knob replaced with careful hands, each drawer polished until it slid as smooth as memory. I had poured hours into that wood. Now flecks of white spotted its surface like a rash, a humiliation of labor undone. And there, leaning against the doorframe with arms crossed, was Ethan. My son. 32 years old. But in that moment he looked like a man I had never raised. A figure carved from arrogance rather than the boy who once whispered to me at night that monsters hid in his closet. His smirk was slight but sharp, the kind that doesn't fade even when the lips stop moving. Beside him, Kayla stood with her weight shifted onto one hip, scrolling her phone with lazy flicks of her thumb. Her grin wasn't careless. It was victorious, the grin of someone who already believed the battle had been won before I even walked in. When she finally lifted her head, she tilted it in mock sweetness. Just freshening up before we move in, she chirped, her voice pitched high, sugar poured over venom. Move in. The words stabbed deeper than the smell of paint. Ethan straightened just enough to add, almost bored, as though I were the last person who needed consulting. Mom, this room's way too big for just you. The sentence was casual, but casual in the way a thief whistles while breaking a lock. It wasn't information. It was decree. Something in me recoiled. This room had held me through every loneliness. It had been the one space where my body could sink into sheets without someone asking for money, where silence wasn't an accusation but a bomb. I felt the edges of myself rising, jagged and raw. Who decided this? My voice cut across the scraping of rollers. When did you plan someone else's house without me? One of the painters paused mid-stroke. He glanced at me, then at Ethan, then back to me, his roller dripping white. His Adam's apple bobbed. Ma'am, we can stop if. Keep going, Kayla snapped, not even looking up. Her free hand waved the air as if dismissing a servant. We already paid. I blinked, the floor shifting under me. Pay? With what? I had seen their overdue notices. The electricity bill folded on their counter. The hospital charges they begged me to help with just this once. Kayla's designer bag dangled from her shoulder like a trophy of borrowed luxuries. My stomach twisted. The loan. The one I gave them last month. $2,300 scraped from my night shifts, from hours spent on swollen feet in a cafeteria kitchen that smelled of onions and grease. Just until payday, Ethan had promised. Just to catch us up. That money was now splashed in white across my walls. I didn't need to ask. Their silence was answer enough. They had paid the painters with my sacrifice. They had written me out of my own home using my own hands' labor. Something cracked inside me. Not loudly. Not like thunder. More like the sharp fracture of porcelain when it falls. Clean, quiet, final. I stared at Ethan. I searched for the boy who once carried wildflowers from the yard and placed them in chipped cups on my bedside table. The boy who used to slip notes under my pillow that said, "Best mom ever," written in clumsy letters. But his eyes now slid past me, already calculating something else. Already belonging more to Kayla's grin than to the woman who had raised him. Kayla tucked her phone into her bag and leaned against the frame, mirroring Ethan's stance. "It'll look cleaner this way," she said. "White's modern. Your peach is dated." Dated? As if years of my survival, my grief, my comfort were a trend that had expired. The painter shifted again, rolling slower now, perhaps sensing the storm brewing. His voice wavered. "Ma'am, do you want us to stop?" "Yes," I said louder this time. But Kayla's voice cut through sharper. "No. We've got it covered." And that was when I realized something fundamental. They weren't asking permission. They never had been. This wasn't negotiation. This was conquest. I pressed my palm against the doorframe to steady myself, nails digging into old wood worn smooth by years of my touch. Behind me, the hallway hummed with silence. My silence, the kind that had kept peace through years of requests, loans, and sacrifices. Silence had always been my way of avoiding confrontation. But here, in this room stripped of its color, silence felt like surrender. My chest burned. My throat closed. But no tears came. Only heat. Only rage. I wanted to scream. To rip the rollers from their hands. To throw open the window and let the cold air wash out the suffocating stench of latex. But instead, I stood there, watching my walls disappear stroke by stroke, the sound of bristles dragging like a saw across my bones. Kayla crossed her arms, satisfied, and leaned into Ethan as though this was a shared joke. A moment of triumph for the two of them. She didn't even glance at me again. I wasn't part of the scene. I was background, furniture, something being painted over. And in that moment, watching the dresser I had restored be splattered, watching my curtains lie trampled, watching my son stand on the other side of the line, I thought blood would never let him cross. I understood. This wasn't just paint. This was erasure. And erasure, I knew, was only ever the first step. My name is Nora Carter. I am 62 years old, and I know exactly what $1 costs. Not the way bankers know, with interest rates and market charts. Not the way politicians toss it around like confetti. I know in the currency of heat and grease, in the aching soles of feet that have stood 12 hours on tiled floors, in the smell of onions that seeps into skin no matter how many showers you take. Every wrinkle on my hands is a ledger. Every scar, every callus, every stiff joint is a receipt. For the last 15 years I worked kitchens, hospital cafeterias mostly. The last 2 years were the graveyard shift at Cleveland Mercy. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., stocking shelves, stirring vats of soup, scrubbing pans until my back screamed. I'd clock out when dawn cracked over the parking lot, ride 2 buses home, and collapse for an hour before life demanded more. The uniform was polyester and sweat. The soundtrack, the hiss of fryers and the bark of supervisors timing every break. Before Mercy, there were diners, school cafeterias, catering gigs where I carried trays heavier than myself. Decades blurred into each other. People ate, they smiled, they left. Nobody remembered the woman behind the steam. That was the point. Cooks aren't meant to be seen. We are meant to keep moving, invisible as the heat that warms the food. I was widowed at 52. Walt, my husband of 31 years, worked warehouses until his lungs gave out. He left me tenderness but not much else. A retirement fund that covered his funeral. A used truck that I sold for scrap. And a silence that howled through the house at night. He wasn't a rich man, but he had a softness about him. He brought me gas station roses, fixed hinges when they squeaked, rubbed my shoulders without being asked. That was wealth enough. When he died, the floor beneath me cracked, but kitchens kept me upright. Work doesn't care if you're grieving. Work just asks. Next plate. Ethan was my only child. As a boy he was quiet, thoughtful. He'd help me peel potatoes, sit on the counter swinging his legs, eyes wide with stories about dinosaurs or astronauts. I thought grief would weld us together tighter after Walt's death. And maybe for a time it did. But somewhere between college loans and first jobs, the boy with the paper flowers turned into a man who found it easier to take than to give. Then came Kayla. If Ethan was quiet waters, Kayla was a storm that always wanted more. She walked into his life, and mine, with demands disguised as dreams. Better cars, shinier apartments, zip codes with status. Her laugh was loud, her eyes sharp, her compliments always followed by a suggestion. Mom, Kayla thinks we should take a trip. We deserve it. Kayla says the stroller we picked isn't safe enough. Kayla read that investing in furniture is smarter long-term. I don't think Ethan ever realized the pattern. Or maybe he did and chose not to care. But I noticed. Kayla's sentences always ended with a price tag. And who paid? Me. I paid with hours bent over pots, with blisters from carrying crates, with every second shift I accepted when my body begged me not to. I paid when they got married. $700 slipped into their palms because Ethan said, Mom, we want a simple wedding, but it's still adding up. I paid when hospital bills came due. $600 for Kayla's appendectomy, money that should have gone toward fixing my leaking roof. I paid for a stroller. $80 at Target, my back screaming after a double shift, but Kayla said, this model is ergonomic. Mom will understand became their favorite phrase. Except understand really meant Mom will pay. At first I told myself this was family. Walt and I had scraped through plenty. Maybe I was just continuing the tradition of sacrifice. But traditions rot when they are one-sided. Years rolled by and I realized I had become their safety net, their cushion, their guarantee. They lived with plans. I lived with exhaustion. Kitchens taught me two truths. First, no one defends you but you. If you don't speak up, supervisors will ride you until your knees give out. Co-workers will dump their work on you. And customers will curse you as though you burned their soup on purpose. Second, every dollar equals half an hour of your life. 30 minutes of sweat. 30 minutes of backache. 30 minutes of swallowing insults because you need the shift. That's the exchange rate. That's the math that mattered when Kayla chirped about just a few hundred. As if hundreds weren't weeks carved from my body. I remember one night at Mercy. The fryer clogged, oil spitting onto my arms. The manager yelled, hurry it up, Nora, breakfast starts in 20. My wrists burned, skin blistering, but I scrubbed until the steel gleamed. At 6 a.m., I sat in the locker room staring at the raw welts, calculating how much those hours had bought. $88 before taxes. The next day, Kayla texted Ethan, who called me. Mom, can you help us cover a car payment? It's just $80. Kayla stressed. I sent it without hesitation. The sting on my skin reminded me for weeks that Kayla's stress mattered more than my burns. That's who I was outside their plans. A worker, a widow, a mother who confused sacrifice with duty. I thought love was proven through giving, through handing over paychecks, through silence when I wanted to scream. I thought if I just gave enough, Ethan and Kayla would see me not as a wallet, but as a person. Instead, I taught them that my limits were invisible. I taught them that every yes meant there would never be a no. And by the time I realized what I had done, they were already painting over my peach walls, erasing me with money I had sweated to earn. Rent had been climbing like ivy on a wall, strangling tighter each year. My landlord, a man with manicured hands who never once fixed a leak without 3 reminders, slid the new notice under my door. $75 more a month. He always smiled when he said, it's just the market, Nora. Just the market, as if the market would scrub toilets. As if the market would wake at 3 a.m. to pull frozen chickens from industrial freezers. That day I sat at my kitchen table staring at the slip, the numbers glaring like accusations. I had been patient. Too patient. I had swallowed each increase with the excuse that at least I had a roof. But patience snapped that morning like a rubber band stretched too far. My hands trembled as I reached for my secret stashes. I had never trusted banks fully, not after watching fees eat into Walt's paycheck back in the 90s. So I became my own vault. 1 slipped under the mattress. 5 sewn into the hem of an old winter coat. 10s folded inside recipe books no one opened. Coins rattled in a Maxwell House coffee tin tucked behind flour in the pantry. Years of scraping, of telling myself someday, had left me with $4,200. To someone else it might have been a scrap, a rounding error. To me it was a lifeline. I spread the bills across the table, the colors of survival. Each note carried a story. The 20 I didn't spend on a new pair of shoes. The 50 I kept instead of buying Kayla's must-have blender. The $1 tips I had tucked away instead of tossing into vending machines on sleepless nights. I stacked them neatly, smoothed their wrinkles. This was not just money. This was flesh converted into paper. Slavic Village was where I looked. Cleveland's tired heart. Streets lined with houses sagging like old men's shoulders. Paint peeled from porches. Weeds split through sidewalks. Some windows were covered with plywood. Others glared hollow and broken. People drove through fast, eyes forward. But I walked those streets and felt something else, possibility. Decay is just neglect waiting for hands that care. I found it on a gray March afternoon. 2 bedrooms. Roof not caving but not proud either. Paint flaking like dry skin. The porch sagged under its own weight. But inside, past the stale air and damp carpet, in the main room, was a window. Wide east-facing, glass uncracked. When sunlight streamed through, even under clouds, the room glowed faintly. I stood there and imagined mornings not of clocks and bosses, but of light warming my skin. I imagined coffee brewed on my terms, a chair angled toward the sunrise, silence that belonged only to me. That window was not glass. It was a promise. The real estate agent, a woman in heels too thin for the cracked sidewalk, clicked through the rooms with the boredom of someone rehearsing lines. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, small yard, furnace works, roof patched 3 years ago. Asking $52,000. Cash preferred. Cash. She said it as if it were a language I did not speak. But I did. I have 48, I replied, voice steady though my palms dampened around the envelope of bills in my bag. Her eyes flicked toward me, one brow raised. 48. Cash. The word silenced her skepticism. Numbers on paper are promises. Cash is fact. 3 days later, papers were signed. 3 weeks later, keys pressed into my palm. When I stepped inside the first night, no furniture, no sound but the echo of my own breath. I felt dizzy. The house smelled of damp plaster and old dust, but underneath was something cleaner. Freedom. I unrolled a blanket on the bare wooden floor, set my bag beside me like a guard dog, and lay down. The boards creaked under my weight. I stared at the ceiling where cracks spiderwebbed like veins. It wasn't beautiful. Not yet. But it was mine. The silence was startling. No upstairs neighbors slamming doors. No landlord's letters slipped under the crack. No Kayla's voice chirping about what was practical. Just stillness. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in decades, I didn't dream of debt collectors or kitchen timers. I dreamed of sun spilling through glass. At dawn, light streamed through the east window. It poured gold across the floorboards, reaching me like a benediction. I sat up and wrapped my blanket tight, tears slipping uninvited. That light wasn't a sunrise. It was possession. It whispered, "This belongs to you." And in that fragile morning glow, I swore no one would take it. Not landlord, not debt, not even my own blood. This was the first thing in decades that was fully, fiercely mine. Moving didn't happen all at once. It unfolded like penance, heavy, slow, body against weight. I had no truck, no savings for movers. What I had was a bus pass, a pair of sore arms, and stubbornness hard as bone. 3 weekends it took. 3 weekends of trudging with bulging bags that cut into my shoulders, my breath puffing in cold Cleveland air. I stacked pots inside laundry baskets, rolled clothes into garbage bags, and dragged them from the apartment to the bus stop. Each trip felt like proof that I was still capable, still unwilling to surrender. Other passengers glanced at me with pity, some with irritation, as if my bags threatened their space. But I kept my eyes forward. I wasn't moving just objects. I was hauling a life I had fought to reclaim. Dennis from work saved me from breaking. Dennis was a line cook, 60 like me, with arms thick from decades of stirring soups and hoisting trays. One Friday after shift he slapped my shoulder and said, "Heard you bought yourself a place. Got a truck sitting idle. We'll move the heavy stuff this weekend." That old pickup looked like it had seen 2 wars, paint chipped, muffler grumbling. But it carried my refrigerator, washer, and the oak table Walt and I had bought secondhand in 1985. We wrestled it through narrow doors, sweat dripping, curses flying. When we finally set it down in the yellow-lit kitchen of my new house, Dennis grinned, teeth flashing through his beard. Hell of a place, Nora. Feels like it'll listen when you talk. I laughed, breathless. That's all I need. A house that doesn't talk back. We ate sandwiches on upturned boxes, mustard dripping onto our laps, the smell of fresh paint mingling with bread. He left at dusk, truck rattling down the street, and I stood alone in my living room surrounded by stacked belongings, feeling like a pioneer staking claim to land no one else wanted. The first task was paint. I couldn't bear the nicotine-stained beige that coated every wall. I picked colors like I was picking seasons. Soft yellow for the living room, to mimic sunlight even on gray days, mint green for the bathroom, a freshness that smelled cleaner than bleach ever could. Pale cream for the bedroom, the color of calm. I painted after shifts, brush in one hand, radio humming old Motown tunes. My arms ached, my knees stiffened from climbing ladders, but with every stroke I felt the house shed its past. It was no longer a property. It was my home. Repairs came next. A faucet that dripped like an accusation. A window frame swollen shut from years of rain. I didn't call professionals. I couldn't afford them. Instead, I marched to the library, borrowed how-to guides, and studied diagrams like sacred texts. I learned the names of tools, the order of washers, the patience of sanding. My hands fumbled at first, but each fix stitched me deeper into the bones of the house. Saturday mornings, I opened the east window wide. Sunlight flooded in, warm and insistent, painting gold across my thrift store rug. I'd set a cup of coffee, brewed in a small new maker I bought just for this house, on the windowsill, and sip while birds chattered in the half-dead tree out front. That light felt like a conversation. It reminded me each morning, you own this. You carved this from nothing. Evenings I lit candles. Not fancy ones. Cheap glass jars with scents like vanilla or lavender. But lighting them was ritual, claiming the air with my choices. No landlord's mildew, no neighbor's cigarette smoke, no Kayla's perfume lingering after visits. Just my scent, my decision. The yard was nothing more than patchy grass bordered by chain-link fence, but I dug with bare hands, ripping weeds, turning soil. I planted marigolds and daisies, hardy flowers that didn't demand much, but gave color generously. Watching them bloom felt like defiance. Where others saw decay, I coaxed life. Bills shrank to nothing but utilities and small repairs. No more rent slips slid under my door like threats. Each month I saved $350. Money that once evaporated into a landlord's pocket now stacked quietly in envelopes inside my dresser. It felt like breathing after years of suffocation. Sundays became holy in a new way. I woke when I pleased, brewed coffee, and sat barefoot on the porch with a newspaper spread across my knees. Sometimes I called Denise and Liz, co-workers who'd become friends, and invited them for lunch. We'd eat beans and rice at my small oak table, laughter bouncing against yellow walls, sunlight catching the edges of their smiles. For once, joy didn't feel borrowed. At night, when silence fell heavy, I didn't fear it. Silence was no longer emptiness. It was mine. I lay in bed, candles flickering shadows across cream walls, and felt something I hadn't felt since before Walt died. Not just quiet. Not just survival. Peace. A little heaven built slowly, stubbornly, with my own blistered hands. And I swore, as I sipped coffee at dawn, as I brushed paint onto walls, as I tucked envelopes of savings into drawers, that I would not let anyone strip it away. Not Ethan. Not Kayla. Not even blood. This was mine. The house had beg asterisk and to look like mine. Walls painted, marigolds stubbornly bright in the yard, curtains fluttering against clean windows. I had survived the move, survived the repairs, survived the silence. Now it was time for something I hadn't allowed myself in years. Celebration. I planned it the way other people plan weddings. Lists scribbled on envelopes, menus rehearsed in my head while stirring soup at Mercy, timing every dish so the table would overflow. I wanted proof for myself, for anyone who doubted, that a 62-year-old woman who scrubbed pans for a living could build not just shelter, but a home worth filling with voices. The Saturday of the feast, I rose before dawn. The kitchen filled with the rhythm of chopping, sizzling, simmering. Chicken browned in sauce until the smell clung to the curtains. Beans soaked overnight boiled gently, filling the air with earthiness. Rice steamed under a towel, soft and fragrant. I pressed dough into circles, flipping tortillas one by one, steam fogging the window. By mid-morning, the counters were crowded. Bowls of salsa, a heap of lettuce, platters waiting for company. Denise and Liz arrived first, balancing a white bakery box that released the sweet scent of pastries as soon as they cracked it open. "We couldn't let you do it all," Denise said, hugging me so tight I smelled her perfume on my shirt. Marco, the electrician who had fixed my porch light after work one evening, came with a bundle of herbs tied with string. "For your garden," he said, shrugging when I tried to thank him. Cousin April walked through the door carrying nothing but herself. And that was enough. She hugged me the way only someone who remembers your childhood can. Tight, eyes closed, with a silent message. "You made it." The house swelled with laughter. Voices tangled over each other. Chairs scraped. Music hummed from the old radio. Plates clinked, forks scraped, and every bite was seasoned with something money couldn't buy. Respect. For a few hours, I forgot the years of labor, the debts, the loneliness. I looked around my yellow-painted living room and saw proof that I wasn't invisible. These people didn't see a paycheck. They saw me. And then, as always, Ethan and Kayla arrived late. The air shifted the moment they stepped through the door. Conversations thinned, smiles faltered. Kayla scanned the room with eyes sharp as glass, searching not for warmth but for flaws. Ethan trailed behind her, expressionless, carrying a six-pack as if it excused everything. "Kitchen's tiny," Kayla announced before setting down her purse. She ran a manicured finger across the counter, inspecting for dust. "And that bathroom? Outdated. You could knock down a wall, maybe expand." I smiled tightly, pressing a dish into her hands so she couldn't keep pointing. "Sit. Eat." But she wrinkled her nose at the chicken, at the beans, at the rice. "You know, quinoa's healthier. And Ethan loves Thai now." I watched my son spoon food onto his plate anyway, chewing mechanically, eyes on the table. He didn't defend me, didn't push back. Silence is a choice, and his silence was louder than her insults. After dessert, Denise's pastries, flaky and sweet, disappearing fast. Kayla cleared her throat, her grin stretching wide. Ethan shifted in his seat, and I knew something was coming. "Mom," Kayla began, her tone dripping honey, "we've been thinking. This house is great for now. But imagine if you sold it. We could pool the money, get something bigger, something modern, in a nicer neighborhood. We'd all live together. Practical, right?" Her words hung in the air like smoke. I set down my fork slowly. Practical. Practical meant giving up my east window, my marigolds, my garden, my silence. Practical meant returning to a life where every corner was negotiated, where my own spoons would be rearranged without permission. "No," I said, my voice calm but final. Kayla blinked, her smile stiffening. "Don't be stubborn. It makes sense." "Sense for who?" I asked. The table went quiet. Denise looked down. Marco shifted uncomfortably. April's eyes darted between us, sensing the crack widening. Ethan finally spoke, his voice low, almost embarrassed. "Mom, think about it. Bigger place, shared expenses. You don't have to do everything alone." "I've done everything alone since your father died," I replied, locking my gaze on his. "And I'm still standing." Silence fell heavier than before. Kayla's jaw tightened, but she pasted on a smile and leaned back in her chair. "Well," she said, "we just want what's best for you." What's best for me? As if they knew. As if they cared. Later, after everyone left, Denise hugging me tight, Marco giving a reassuring nod, April whispering, "Don't let them push you." I sat on the porch. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of marigolds. My hands still smelled of chicken and garlic. I replayed Kayla's words. "Sell this. Move in together. Be practical." I stared at the east window glowing faintly in the dark, light from the street lamp catching its glass. That window was my survival, my sunrise, my proof. And they wanted to turn it into equity, into leverage, into another step in their ladder. Friends see me. Family sees a resource. The line had been drawn. Whether I liked it or not, whether I was ready or not, the war had begged *N. The night shift always left me hollowed out. By 6:30 a.m., when I finally clocked out of the hospital cafeteria, my legs buzzed with pain. Standing for 8 hours on tile floors that reflected every fluorescent glare felt like a punishment devised by someone who had never worked a day in their life. My uniform clung to me with the sour scent of grease and onions. My shoes, cheap sneakers worn thin, were damp from a spill I hadn't even had the energy to mop up. That morning I stopped at the discount market near the subway. My fridge at home was nearly bare, and I couldn't face another week of bread heels and instant noodles. I dragged 2 grocery bags down the narrow aisles. Milk, beans, rice, a pack of chicken thighs, coffee grounds. By the time I reached the register, the handles cut into my palms like wire. I swiped my card, praying the balance would cover it. The cashier handed me my receipt without looking up. To her, I was another tired woman with bags too heavy for her arms. I shuffled into the subway station, heart hammering with the effort of carrying what little I could afford. The train screeched in, brakes screaming. I squeezed inside, pressed between a man in a suit scrolling on his phone, and a woman humming softly to herself. My arms ached. The bags bit deeper into my fingers. I shifted my weight, fighting the urge to sit on the grimy floor. Then I heard it. A voice behind me. High, sharp, familiar. Kayla. I froze, barely breathing. She was laughing into her phone, her tone bright and careless, like betrayal was a punchline. Oh, don't worry. Soon this old wreck will sign everything over. Her words sliced cleaner than any knife. Old wreck. That was me. Me, the woman whose hands had built their dinners, whose savings had paid their bills, whose loans had kept them afloat. Me, the one who had handed them money so many times I lost track, swallowing my pride because I thought family meant sacrifice. To her, I wasn't a mother-in-law. I wasn't a person. I was an obstacle waiting to die. My fingers clenched the grocery bags so hard my knuckles whitened. Blood roared in my ears, drowning out the screech of the train. I wanted to turn, to look her in the eye, to ask her what she had ever given me that gave her the right to strip me bare in front of strangers. But I didn't move. I held still, letting her words soak into me like acid. The train jolted. I stumbled forward, caught myself against the pole. My breath came shallow, chest tight. Kayla kept talking, voice dripping with confidence. Yeah, she won't last. She's already tired. Once we're in, everything's ours. I stepped off at my stop, bags heavier than ever, heart thudding with a rhythm I didn't recognize. Something had shifted. By the time I climbed the stairs to street level, the city looked different. The cracked sidewalks, the rows of tired houses, the morning sun breaking through gray clouds. Everything shimmered with a strange clarity. I had always endured, always excused, always told myself that giving was the same as loving. But those words on the subway had cracked something open inside me. At home, I shoved the groceries into the fridge, my hands shaking. Ethan was sprawled on my couch, crumbs scattered across the cushion, the television blaring some mindless show. His shoes were kicked off, his socks dirty, his body slouched like the house already belonged to him. "Morning, Mom," he said without looking up. I stared at him. My son. My only child. 32 years old, unemployed, living on my couch while his wife called me an old wreck on the subway. 2 weeks, I whispered. That was what he'd promised when they moved in. 2 weeks until they found a place. That had stretched into 2 months. 2 months of dishes left in the sink. Of groceries vanishing faster than I could buy them. Of nights when I locked my bedroom door because I no longer trusted the silence. I thought of every mom, help us out, that I had answered with open hands. Every sacrifice made quietly, believing it would be remembered with love. Every time I had bent until my spine nearly broke. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. Not loudly. Not with shouting or smashed plates. It was quieter than that, more dangerous. A resolve settling into my bones. No more sense for their laziness. No more inches of my house handed over like tribute. No more silence mistaken for weakness. If it came to it, it would be me against them. And I was ready. I sat at my oak table, the one Walt and I had bought decades ago, and let the morning light from my east window fall across my face. The bags had cut red lines into my palms, but I didn't mind the sting. Pain was nothing new. What was new was the fire behind it. Kayla thought she could laugh about me, dismiss me, erase me. Ethan thought he could sink into my couch and call it comfort. They both thought my 62 years made me fragile. But they had forgotten one thing. Kitchens teach endurance. And endurance is just another word for survival. The old wreck still had teeth. It began on a Saturday morning with a sound I should never have heard. The slow turn of my front door lock. I was in the kitchen, pouring coffee into a chipped mug, when the knob twisted with the confidence of someone who believed they belonged. The door swung open, and there stood Ethan, grinning as though he'd just returned from a grocery run instead of breaking into my home. He stepped inside, shoes leaving tracks across my freshly mopped floor, and held up a set of keys like a prize. "Kayla copied them last time," he said. His tone was light, almost teasing. "You know, for safety." My coffee sloshed over the rim, burning my hand. Safety. That was what he called it. Stealing entry into the one place that was supposed to be mine. I set the mug down carefully, my voice steady though my chest roared. "Hand them over." He laughed, dropping onto my couch as if it were his throne. "Mom, relax. We'll just stay here till we find something." Till we find something. The phrase curled like smoke, the same promise he'd made months ago. 2 weeks. 2 weeks had stretched into 2 months, and now into permanence. I called the police, my hands trembling as I explained. The officer who arrived was young, barely older than Ethan. He looked at the keys, looked at my son sprawled across the couch, and shrugged. "Family matter," he said. "If they've got keys, it's civil. Can't force them out." Civil. That word tasted like rust. What was civil about being erased in your own house? That night I locked my bedroom door. For the first time in my life, I felt like a stranger in my own home. I listened to the thud of their footsteps down the hallway, the creak of my couch springs, the television blaring late into the night. I clutched my blanket tighter, each sound a reminder that I was under siege. Day 2. I came into the living room and found the couch shoved aside, my plants dumped unceremoniously onto the porch. Dirt clung to the floor like blood from a wound. Kayla, perched in a new armchair I had never seen before, smiled brightly. "The layout flows better this way. You'll thank me." Day 3. I went to make coffee and found my small, beloved maker gone. In its place sat a sleek machine that hissed and beeped, all chrome and flashing lights. Kayla leaned against the counter, stirring sugar into her mug. "Yours was outdated," she said. "This one's better." Better. For whom? Not for me, who preferred the quiet gurgle of my simple brewer, who didn't need a machine that looked like it belonged in a cafe. Day 4. I returned from a shift at Mercy to find strangers in my bedroom. 2 painters, their rollers dripping with white, stood mid-stroke when I opened the door. My dresser, the one I had restored with my own hands, had been dragged to the center of the room, flecked with paint like an execution victim. My peach walls, my sunsets, vanished under sterile coats. "Kids need space," Kayla said from the doorway, her smile bright as knives. "And white is modern." Ethan appeared beside her, arms crossed. "We ordered a new bedroom set. It'll look great." My throat closed. "With what money?" Their eyes flicked, quick and guilty, toward the dresser where I kept my stash. My heart sank. I had hidden envelopes of savings there, months of careful budgeting, the scraps I'd managed to save since buying the house. Money meant for repairs, for emergencies, for dignity. They didn't answer. They didn't need to. Their silence screamed. I stared at the paint streaks on my dresser, at my curtains crumpled on the floor, at the strangers who thought they were redecorating instead of erasing. Something inside me tightened. A knot of rage and sorrow wound so tight it threatened to snap. I thought of the subway, of Kayla's voice mocking me as an old wreck. I thought of Ethan on my couch, crumbs scattered like confetti of entitlement. I thought of every dollar I had worked for in kitchens, every hour I had sweated for their comfort, every moment I had confused sacrifice for love. And I knew. This wasn't just intrusion. It was conquest. They were colonizing me, stripping my life room by room, painting over me until nothing of Nora remained. But they had miscalculated. They thought age meant weakness. They thought my silence meant surrender. What they didn't know was that kitchens had trained me for war. For patience. For timing. For surviving heat that could blister skin and still walking out standing. They had taken my keys, my space, even my coffee. But I still had my mind. And I would use it. It was the white streaks on my dresser that finally told the truth. For years I had overlooked slights, endured insults, excused laziness. I told myself love explained everything. But when I opened the drawer where I kept my small envelopes of savings, the air left my chest. Empty. $2,300 gone. I counted 3 times, my fingers shaking. I knew exactly what had been there. Every bill memorized like a prayer. Months of small victories. Extra shifts, skipped lunches, coins pulled from tips, all gathered into paper stacks. Money I had sworn would keep this house alive. Gone. Kayla breezed in with her voice like syrup poured over mold. We just borrowed a little. For improvements. When we sell, it'll pay off. When? Not if. The word was heavier than the theft. They were speaking of my home as if it were a pawn ticket. Not shelter. Not sanctuary. An asset to be liquidated when it suited them. I stared at Ethan. My son. His eyes slid away, his jaw tight. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. The dresser behind me bore white scars from careless rollers. Evidence smeared across the wood I had saved from rot. My peach walls had been buried, my curtains trampled, my savings gutted. It wasn't just theft. It was an erasure of everything I had built. That night I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee growing cold. I spread papers across the wood. Receipts, bank slips, notes scribbled on envelopes. I picked up my phone and took photos of every violation. Paint splatters on my furniture, plants dumped outside, cupboards rearranged, the monstrous chrome coffee maker glinting like a trophy. Evidence. Proof that this was not family but invasion. I thought of Marco, the electrician who had eaten sandwiches with me on moving day. He had once scribbled a lawyer's number on a napkin. Just in case you need someone who knows the law. I dug it from a drawer, smoothing the creases. Ms. Patel. Her name became my anchor. I froze my bank account the next morning. The teller's eyes flickered when I explained, but she nodded, tapping keys, her voice firm. Your funds are secure now. Then I booked a locksmith. Dawn appointment. Change every lock, I said. Doors, windows, even the gate. And I packed a small bag with documents, deed ID, insurance papers, and hid it in the bottom of my work locker at Mercy. If they tried to rummage again, they would find only bare drawers and dust. In kitchens, I had learned endurance. Under bosses who screamed over late trays, under heat that blistered skin, under customers who cursed for mistakes I hadn't made. You survive not by breaking, but by waiting, by knowing when to strike. Strategy is just endurance sharpened. I drew up steps in my notebook. 1. Document everything. 2. Secure the locks. 3. Secure the money. 4. Secure a witness. They thought I was weak because my hair was gray, because my back ached, because I chose silence more often than shouting. They mistook age for surrender. But age is only another word for experience. When Ethan and Kayla went to bed that night, I walked through the house in bare feet, touching walls, checking windows, feeling the grooves of the wood under my fingers. This was mine. Bought with every hour I had sweated. Paid for in burns and calluses. No one, not even my son, would take it. Morning would prove otherwise. At 5 in the morning, while the rest of the street still slept under gray dawn, a battered white van pulled up in front of my house. Out stepped Mr. O'Reilly, the locksmith Marco had recommended, his tool bag swinging heavy at his side. He was older, hair thin to wisps, but his hands moved with the certainty of a man who had opened and closed doors his whole life. Change everything, I told him. Front, back, side windows if you can. Gate 2. He nodded, no questions asked. His drill hummed low and steady, a heartbeat of liberation. Screws fell like coins onto the porch. Old locks clattered into a bucket, useless now. New brass gleamed under the faint light, fresh teeth cut into new keys. By the time the sun crested the horizon, my house had been rewritten. I held the cool metal of the keys in my palm, their weight electric. For the first time since Ethan had swaggered in waving his stolen copy, I could breathe. One spare went to Marco, tucked into his calloused hand when he came by on his way to a job. If anything happens, I told him, you're the one I trust. The other I slipped into the deepest pocket of my work bag, under my uniform, where no hands but mine would find it. By noon, the phone began to scream. First Ethan, his voice raw with fury. Why did you change the locks? This is our home too. Then Kayla, shrill and sharp. You can't do this. We paid for furniture, we fixed the place up. We have rights. I let the calls pile up unanswered, the screen filling with their names like buzzing flies. When I finished my shift at Mercy and stepped off the bus that evening, my stomach tightened. From half a block away I saw Ethan pacing on the porch, jaw clenched, phone in hand. Kayla sat on the steps, arms crossed, her glare cutting like a blade even from a distance. Open up now, Ethan barked as soon as I reached the gate. I stopped, keys firm in my pocket. No. If you want your things, you'll collect them under police watch. Kayla sprang to her feet, her voice sharp enough to draw curtains twitching in nearby windows. We live here. You can't just lock us out like tenants. That's exactly what I can do, I said, my voice low but steady. As if summoned by the tension, Marco's pickup pulled up to the curb. He climbed out slowly, his broad shoulders filling the space beside me, arms folded across his chest. He didn't speak, just stood, a wall of witness. Ethan's face darkened. You called backup? Against your own son? I stared at him, searching for the boy who once brought me paper flowers from school, the boy who used to slip notes under my pillow that said best mom ever. All I saw was a man who saw me as property. Yes, I said simply. The police arrived 20 minutes later, lights flashing blue against the marigolds in my yard. 2 officers stepped out, their eyes flicking between me, my son, and the woman clutching his arm like a lifeline. What's the situation? One asked. She's locked us out of our home, Kayla cried, pointing at me with theatrical indignation. We paid for furniture. We've been living here for months. She can't just throw us onto the street. The officer turned to me. Ma'am, do they have a rental agreement? I pulled the deed from my bag, the paper crisp, my name bold at the top. This is my house. They have no lease, no rent receipts, nothing. The officer's tone hardened. Then they're guests. Guests without consent are trespassing. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he still tried one last trick. She's confused. She's making bad decisions. We're just trying to help her. The officer cut him off. Sir, the law is clear. Without a lease, you have no claim. Collect your belongings and leave. I watched them drag out what they had smuggled in. The giant flat-screen TV, the fancy coffee maker, the overpriced bedroom set still smelling of packaging. They carried boxes of clothes, bags of Kayla's shoes, piles of things they had bought with money pulled from my veins. Each item clattered onto the porch like evidence. You'll regret this, Kayla spat, her face twisted with rage. We were trying to build a family. You chose strangers over blood. Better alone, I said, my spine straightening as the sun slid low behind me, than in bad company. The words landed heavy, final. For once, Ethan had no comeback. They loaded their boxes into a borrowed van, slammed the doors, and roared off down the street. Neighbors peeked through blinds, whispers floating like smoke. I stood on the porch, Marco steady beside me, the new locks gleaming in the twilight. My house was scarred, walls streaked, furniture flecked with paint, soil spilled where plants had been tossed aside. But it was mine again. And for the first time in months, the air around me felt light. The pounding came at dawn, shaking the door like fists against a coffin. I jolted upright in bed, heart racing. When I opened the door, 2 uniformed officers stood on the porch. Behind them, Ethan and Kayla hovered like vultures, their faces slick with triumph. Mrs. Carter, one officer said, his tone clipped, we have a warrant to search the premises for disputed property and financial documents. A warrant. The word landed like ice in my stomach. Kayla stepped forward, a folder clutched against her chest. She's holding our furniture and cash. We have proof. The officer leafed through the folder she handed him. Receipts for a TV, for furniture, for paint. All dated and signed, all neat as if fresh from the printer. Then came the worst. **TS of text messages supposedly from my phone, inviting them to move in, promising shared ownership, even suggesting I had memory lapses. She's been confused, Kayla said sweetly, her eyes wide with manufactured pity. Early dementia runs in her family. We're just trying to help. My blood roared in my ears. Confused. Dementia. My body shook, but not from fear, from rage. I walked to the cupboard and pulled out the deed, the bills, the receipts with my name. This is my home. Every cent came from my wages. They've stolen from me, not the other way around. The officers flipped through my papers, their brows furrowed but unconvinced. The weight of Kayla's folder loomed heavy, her lies thick as fog. Then the door opened again, and Ms. Patel strode in. Marco had called her when the police cars arrived. She was sharp in a dark suit, hair pinned back, eyes scanning everything like a hawk. "What's going on here?" she demanded. Kayla's smile faltered. "We have evidence." "Evidence?" Ms. Patel snatched the folder from the officer's hands, spreading the pages across my oak table. She leaned close, pulling a small magnifier from her pocket. The room went silent except for the scratch of her pen as she circled details. "Metadata doesn't match," she said finally, her voice crisp. "These **TS were generated through an app. The timestamps are inconsistent, fonts mismatched. And these receipts." She held one up, her eyes glittering. Same signature copied across 3 documents. Badly copied at that. The officers stiffened. Their tone shifted. "Forgery is a serious accusation." Ethan's face drained of color. Kayla's lips parted, her perfect smile collapsing. Ms. Patel stacked the forged documents neatly, tapping them against the table like a judge's gavel. "Without a lease, without proof of ownership, you are nothing here. If you return, it's trespass. And if you pursue this forgery further, you'll find yourselves explaining it in front of a judge." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by Kayla's shallow breathing. Ethan tried one last plea, his voice cracking. "Mom, we were just confused. We thought." "No," I said, cutting him off. "You thought I was weak. You thought lies would bury me. But you forgot one thing. Truth has sharper teeth." Kayla's eyes burned with hatred, but she said nothing. The officers handed the forged folder back to Ms. Patel, who slipped it into her briefcase like evidence for war. The officers' voices were final now. "If you set foot on this property again, it will be trespass." Ethan swallowed hard. Kayla muttered something under her breath. Not an apology, not even an excuse, but a hiss of frustration. They turned and walked down the steps, their footsteps heavy with defeat. I stood in the doorway, my heart pounding. For months they had chipped away at me, each insult, each theft, each manipulation cutting closer to the bone. But here, under the cold morning light, their scheme had collapsed. Not because I shouted louder, but because I prepared. Because I endured. Because I refused to let them write me out of my own story. And as Ms. Patel closed her briefcase with a click, she looked at me and said, "They underestimated you. Don't let them do it again." Her words stayed with me long after their car disappeared down the street. They had tried to erase me with paint, with stolen keys, with forged papers. But erasure requires silence. And I had found my voice. When the squad car turned the corner and vanished, taking Ethan and Kayla's last shred of triumph with it, the house felt different. Lighter, as though a storm had passed. I closed the door, leaned against it, and let the silence seep into me. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of being ignored. Not the tense silence of waiting for footsteps in my hallway. This silence was new, clean, sharp, almost sweet. "They'll try again," Ms. Patel said, her briefcase clasped firmly in her hand. "But now you know what you're up against." "What are my options?" I asked, voice hoarse. She sat at my table, spreading out her papers with the same precision she'd used to dismantle their lies. "You can press charges for theft and forgery. That would be justified. But it will be drawn out, public, and ugly. Or you can pursue a restraining order. Keep them away, and move forward in peace." Her gaze was steady. She wasn't pushing me either way. She was telling me the truth. For a moment, I pictured a courtroom. Ethan sitting at one table, Kayla rehearsing crocodile tears at the other. Their lawyers spinning tales of confusion and weakness. I imagined the whispers of neighbors, the headlines that might never reach print but would echo in gossip. Did I want that battle? Did I want to stand across from my only child in a room where the world would watch me tear him apart? No. I had already buried my husband. I would not bury the last remnants of my son in a courtroom. "I'll take the order," I said. Ms. Patel nodded, sliding forms across the table. "We'll file immediately." And we'll keep everything documented. That night I changed my passwords. Every account, every email, every bank login. My fingers shook as I typed, not from fear, but from the strange thrill of reclaiming what had always been mine. I built a folder on my computer titled East Window. Inside I stored photographs of paint streaks, receipts of bank transfers, the police report, Ms. Patel's notes. A record of survival. Scars written in files. The next morning, coffee in hand, I watched sunlight crawl across the living room wall. The streaks of peach beneath the white paint glowed faintly, refusing to be erased. I smiled. Scars don't ruin walls. They prove what they've endured. Denise arrived later with a box of pastries. She hugged me, her eyes shining. So, free. Free, I answered, the word tasting better than any sugar glaze. We sat at my table eating cherry danishes, the kind Kayla used to mock as cheap. Each bite was victory. Each laugh was louder than the silence Ethan had left behind. Days fell into rhythm again. Work at Mercy. Evenings in the garden. Sundays with people who respected the word no. The marigolds outside thickened, gold heads bobbing in the wind as if nodding approval. My mint green bathroom sparkled after a deep clean. The yellow living room walls caught sunset like fire. Slowly, the house began to feel not just like mine, but like me. Ethan and Kayla left voicemails at first. Pleading. Accusing. Twisting words until they tangled into threats. We were only trying to help you. You'll regret this when you're alone. Family sticks together. I deleted them one by one, my finger steady. Family. What a word. For years I had swallowed it whole, believing it meant sacrifice. That a mother's job was to give until nothing remained. But standing in my kitchen, coffee warming my hands, I understood something new. Family without respect is only a chain. I wasn't a walking ATM. I wasn't square footage to be claimed. I wasn't a tired old woman to be written out of her own life. I was Nora Carter. Widow, worker, homeowner, survivor. And for the first time in years, I didn't just know it. I believed it. Life did not collapse after Ethan and Kayla disappeared. It steadied. It slid into rhythm the way a river finds its course once boulders are moved from the stream. I still worked nights at Mercy. The cafeteria lights hummed. The fryers spat. The steam rose like ghosts. But I came home to silence that belonged to me. No shoes at the door that weren't mine. No blaring television at 2 a.m. No voices mocking my choices. My house breathed with me now, not against me. The garden thickened. Marigolds multiplied in bright orange clusters, stubborn against weeds. Daisies lifted their faces to the sun as though nothing bad had ever happened. When I knelt to water them, soil damp against my palms, I felt grounded. The yard was small, fenced ordinary. Yet each bloom declared, "You fought for this." Inside, the mint bathroom gleamed after fresh scrubbing, the green walls catching morning light in a way that felt almost holy. The yellow living room glowed in the evenings, each sunset pouring across paint like fire. I sometimes sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, watching light climb inch by inch until it vanished into night. The dresser still bore white streaks where careless rollers had scarred it. I never sanded them away. I left them as records, proof that I had come close to losing everything and had held on. Scars remind us of wounds, yes, but also of survival. My peach paint still peeked from beneath the white in my bedroom. At first I hated the reminder. Now I let it be. It was a ghost of what they tried to bury. I slept under it each night, knowing even erasure leaves traces. Ethan and Kayla never called again. No apologies. No olive branches. Just silence. Maybe one day they'll learn respect. Maybe one day we'll talk, on my terms, not theirs. But I no longer wait for it. Absence hurts less than betrayal. The restraining order held. Neighbors stopped whispering after a while. Marco still came by sometimes to check on the porch light. Denise still brought pastries, laughing that I was the only person she knew who could eat a cherry Danish for dinner without guilt. Sundays became sacred. Coffee brewed slow, newspaper spread across the table, marigolds nodding in the yard. I allowed myself small luxuries I'd once denied. A new pair of shoes, a soft blanket, fresh candles. Spending money on myself no longer felt selfish. It felt sane. And through it all, The east window watched me. Every morning, the first thing I saw was light spilling through glass. Sun warming the boards, gold inching across the walls, declaring another day of freedom. That window had been my reason when I bought this house. It was still my reason now. Proof that I had claimed something, built something, defended something. This house wasn't a down payment on anyone else's dreams. It wasn't an inheritance to be counted before I was gone. It wasn't leverage for bigger places, shinier cars, or classier zip codes. It was mine. Bought with burns, with calluses, with sweat. Paid in hours of scrubbing pans, hauling crates, peeling potatoes until my wrists screamed. Paid in nights alone after Walt died. In mornings when I stitched curtains with eyes still swollen from grief. I fought for it. I locked it. I kept it. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and I sit with my coffee by the east window, I imagine Kayla's voice again. This old wreck will sign everything over. I smile now, because the old wreck didn't sign. The old wreck fought back. And if there's a lesson in this, it's simple. Love does not entitle you to someone else's keys. Blood does not grant ownership of another's sacrifices. And sometimes the bravest thing an old wreck can do is change the locks, pour a cup of coffee, and sit by her own window until the light fills the room again.